Over 100 countries are working on central bank digital currencies, or CBDCs as they're becoming known. But so far, only 3 countries have actually launched one: the Bahamas, Jamaica, and Nigeria. But at the end of 2023, the European Central Bank started the preparation phase for a digital euro, meaning we could potentially see it happening as early as 2027. So, what are the drivers behind this? What is it going to mean for consumers? And how do merchants and banks have to prepare for this change? Let's find out in this episode of Navigating Digital Payments.
Welcome to the Navigating Digital Payments podcast, brought to you by Worldline, bringing you the latest innovations, trends, and predictions about the future of payments.
Hello and welcome to this episode of the Navigating Digital Payments podcast. I'm David Daly. I look after the Discovery Hub here at Worldline. And today I'm joined by 2 people who have been really closely involved with the Digital Euro project. We have Thibaut Pelle. He is the Digital Currencies Product Manager at Worldline. Hi, Thibaut. Welcome to the podcast.
Hello, David. Thank you very much for the invitation and looking forward to discussing this topic that is very interesting.
Great to have you with us, Thibaut. And also joining us is Clément Josiak, who is Head of Product in the Financial Services part of the Worldline business. Clément, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, David, and very happy to be there. Such a crucial topic for the Europe.
As I mentioned in the intro, I'm really interested to hear from you why the European Central Bank, the ECB, is working on a digital euro, and also what the timeline is looking like. And I definitely want to find out actually more from you about what's the impact going to be for consumers, merchants and banks. But first, I think, especially for listeners who might not be so familiar with the topic, I think it's really good to start with some background and define some of the terms. So maybe, Thibaut, I could come to you first and ask you in the simplest possible way, if there is a simple way, what is a central bank digital currency?
We'll make it short. Everything is in the name. Central bank digital currency. Basically, this is what we call a central bank liability offered in a digital form for the citizen and for the businesses in the retail payment. And when we talk about digital euros, this is the CBDC of the Europe by the European Central Bank. And if I want to be even clearer, I would say, you can remember digital cash. Some use this term to define a CBDC. It's a digital cash, not a new money. To be clear, also important to understand. It would complement what is already existing. So it will not replace cash. Let's kill that point already. It's just a new way to spend your banknotes, but this time digitally.
And maybe just I could ask you, Thibaut, to clarify one point, because I think many people will have heard of digital currencies, and perhaps they would have heard of some of the more famous cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin or Ethereum. So how is a central bank digital currency different to those cryptocurrencies?
Everything is different. A cryptocurrency is issued by a private corporate, or sometimes you don't even know there is no corporate behind, such as Bitcoin. Ethereum is an association, for instance, and you have a lot of stablecoin issued by private company as well. In this case, this is issued by the central bank. So this is just like your traditional cash that you can use digitally, and this is stable. Maybe even more important, because when you look at the Bitcoin, especially today we are recording, we've seen the past months a rise in the Bitcoin. You won't have it in a digital currency because you would not have it with your banknotes. And this is digital cash. So completely different and fully secure because issued by the central bank.
Okay, so if I understand well, as you say, it's good to use the parallel of cash because cash is something issued by the central bank and backed by the central bank. And of course, the monetary policies and controls that surround that therefore also apply to a CBDC, which lead to having a currency that is assumed to be, let's say, more stable than a cryptocurrency. Okay. Clément, maybe I can come on to you. So having explained what a CBDC is, why is the European Central Bank looking at launching specifically a digital euro?
Yeah, so I think it's a very good transition to what was said just before by Thibaut. And you said some of the things, by the way, David. We mentioned digital. It's the rise of digital payments. we are going into a digital world. So if you consider cash as a payment mean today, you need to go in the digital world. That's as simple as that. So that's, let's say, the key driver that has been explained, the ECB. And by the way, if you look in this direction, cash, you can use it so everywhere. Everybody can use it. So that's one also of the key attributes that's going to be given to the digital euro. And now, other things that also are considered, of course, that we should not exclude. It's all the geopolitical aspect, of course, out of it. Today, many payments are processed by non-European actors, more and more, and it's also a way to fight against it. And finally, you mentioned sovereignty, access to safe euro. It's also to give, to strengthen the euro. So all those reasons are the key drivers of why the ECB is going in this direction.
That's really interesting. And maybe then what I'd like to understand next is, where are we up to so far? So what has already been done on the Digital Euro project? Thibaut, could you share a little bit about that?
Yes, quite a lot actually. The ECB has been very, very active on the topic, one of the most active central banks in the world, for sure. They are taking steps carefully, to define the requirements, etc. So to be clear, in end of 2021, we've entered to what they call the investigation phase. This phase lasts for 2 years until end of November 2023. And in this first phase, what they've done is investigating on the design, what would be the best requirements, also work closely with the private sector to have the opinion on every stakeholder to see what would be the value of such digital euro, and also to launch some prototype exercise already on which we've been involved with Worldline. But the idea is we to have a close collaboration, public and private sector, and draft, and I insist on this term, a draft, and design what could be the requirements. And I say could be because at this stage, no decision has been taken yet. I think it's important to say it to the audience. There is no decision yet.
So at the moment, we have gone through this investigation phase and there is a proposal for what the digital euro could look like. Is that where we are up to so far, Thibaut?
Yes, currently there is a proposal, but a lot of things are still being drafted currently. And also on the legislative part, nothing has been voted yet. Some proposition has been done, some has been reviewed, there has been some amendments, but we are really still in the process. The process is ongoing. We have quite a lot of information now on the digital euro, but we don't have all the information yet. Some specific points are being debated, and a lot of work is still to be done. And that's why we are in this new phase since November, what you've mentioned in the introduction, David, I think, which is the preparation phase. It's because we still need to prepare some things. We need to design, we need to write some requirements. A lot of questions don't have answer yet. And we also have to take care of the legislative process that is being run in parallel, of course, and working closely with the ECB. It's not only the ECB moving forward alone.
And I was going to say, because although it will be ultimately the ECB implementing the digital euro, as I understand it, it will be the European Parliament that has to ultimately pass legislation that approves the launching of a digital euro.
Yes, correct.
Okay, and now, so that's where we are. Maybe, Clément, you can comment a little bit on what lies on the road ahead. So what are the next steps, and when might we perhaps see a digital euro in our virtual pockets?
So indeed, we are today in this preparation phase. That's key. That should end October 25. And honestly, ECB has always been very strict on the timeline, and I think it's still the case. So it should be there. I think one other thing to mention during this phase that's going on today, ECB is looking at what does it mean to build the infrastructure. ECB has issued, beginning of the year, what they call call for application, to be able to be eligible to receive a tender. So in the end, it's going to be tenders to be able to build the key components of the infrastructure. So of course, many players are involved around that. And that's going to be at least one of the steps that is needed to be able at the end, October 25, to indeed know what it means to relaunch that. So of course, you need also to know what it means from a technical standpoint, from a functional and all of those things. And also the rule books, all those things are going on. So that's the step to come. Then it's going to be, let's say, agreed. honestly, we don't know yet. It was said, but mostly it's highly probable. For now, it's what we see from the market research, and the next phase will be to build it really with providers, as we have seen. It's going to take, yes, let's say more or less maybe 2 years. So what is being foreseen for now from the ECB is that as of 27, this is where and when we should see digital euro in use. So it's going to be, and I think we can elaborate on it further, but on different use cases and so on and so forth. But still, from 27, every one of us as consumers, we should be able to use it directly.
So that with the current planning and the current timeline, we would expect to see a digital euro actually launched sometime in 2027, which is, I mean, it's obviously, it's not so soon, but it's also not so far away, I would say.
And especially for Europe, look at it. It's how many countries are involved there for Europe. It's not only one country, so it's also normal to take such time.
In a moment, then, I really would like to understand from you both what you think the impact will be, whether that's for consumers, for merchants, for banks, and also concretely what do they have to start doing now to be ready for that? But before I come on to that, I just want to briefly remind our listeners that if you are interested in getting in contact with us, let us know subjects you want us to discuss, give us any feedback, you can email us by writing to ndp-podcast@worldline.com. And also a gentle reminder, if you haven't already, to subscribe to the podcast, then you never miss an episode, and also take a moment to leave us a rating and a review. So yes, let's come on to, in a moment, what it's going to mean for merchants and banks. But first, maybe Thibaut, I can ask you, what's it going to mean for consumers? Because I guess some people might say, well, I'm perfectly happy with cash or using a credit or a debit card. So what benefits are a digital euro going to bring to me?
Maybe let's start by saying first, they're right. I mean, that's great. They're perfectly fine and happy with credit card and how they are paying currently. That's not an issue. Actually, that's great, I would say. And good news, they will still be able to do so and use the very same payment method as they are today. That's a good thing. But on the other hand, it would bring some benefit to the users. And we will also understand more when we will talk about everything related to the acceptance on the business side, on the merchant side. But first, on the user experience, it is expected, and nothing validated yet, that the digital euro will be a legal tender, which means every business should accept it. Just an example, for instance, maybe. If you're in France, sometime when you're going to a merchant, they said no cards. And when you're in Scotland, and I went last summer, sometimes they were saying no cash, only cards. So you see, there is always sometimes a struggle to see, okay, how should I pay? So I need to have different payment options. With the digital euro, you would have always the possibility to pay with the digital euros because it will be this legal tender. And for every occasion, anytime, and anywhere in the euro area, completely free of charge. So first, for the user experience, I think that's really a benefit. The second one is on the financial inclusion. I think is also interesting. Even though we know, and let's face it, there is some investigation on CBDC in other part of the world, especially in less developed countries, But even in Europe, there is some unbanked people who can struggle to access a form of money, and the only form of money they have currently is the cash. I mean, if you take the Europe, it's, I think, 4% of unbanked people, more than 10 million. And of course, it really depends on the different countries. If you take in France, it's a very, very low amount of people being unbanked. But if you take Croatia, for instance, it's up to 8%. So you see, also for these people, it's a way to really enter the digital economy. Clément said it in the beginning, we are in a digital age. And for some people, they don't have access to a digital economy because to do so, you will need to have access to what? You said it, cryptocurrency. We've seen this is concerning everything related to stability, for instance. You have access to the credit card, so issued by a bank. But to do so, you need to have a bank. And if you don't have any, you have cash. And if you have cash, you can't. So for sure, it will help on financial inclusion. And that's my second point. And the third point is really everything related to what I call the safety net. A safety net is to say, okay, maybe you won't use the digital euro every day. That's possible, most likely. But at the end, when you need it, because for some reason, some crisis, because I don't know, there has been some storm, earthquake, or I don't know why, but for a resilience point of view, you need to have something to pay, and that would be the euro, so the cash that you have. And we said it, digital euro is not a new money, it's just a new way to use your existing euros. So I think that's the third benefit.
And I'd like just to complement there on two aspects. First of all, and Thibault said it, I just want to re-insist on that. I think it's important, and it's what ECB said, by the way. That's not what we said, it's also what ECB said. The digital euro is not there to replace any existing payment. I think it's really fair to say. It's really there to complement. And again, it's to provide, to bring the cash into the digital world. So I just wanted to reinsist on it because I think this is key. And secondly, it's on the use case, because in fact we turned it around about that. I didn't say anything about that just in my previous the question you asked me just before, but I think it's fair to say the ECB wants to address some use case, not all of them at the beginning. I think they have been addressing very precisely some of them. So it's around the P2P, so the peer-to-peer. It's an easy example. I want to give you money. It's a way to give you money, or also some P to businesses and especially to government potentially. That could be very interesting. So they really have identified specific use case, and finding a use case also to respond to the consumer question is going to be key. You need to find a use case for the consumer. If you want to use it tomorrow, you need to have the right use case to find a need. So that's going to be one of the key focus from the ECB, and their willingness is not to brand themselves to the outside world. ECB, they want the digital euro to be used for the right use case to ensure the safety that Thibault mentioned. So they will not make any branding, even though you might have an app, white label app, but still. Remember, a commercial bank is going to play a key role.
Yeah, and we should definitely come back to that point regarding commercial banks in a moment. But if I summarize what you said, Thibault, the first thing is that it will provide a digital payment means across Europe, which will always be accepted by merchants. Again, all of this is potentially and subject to change. Secondly, it can offer better financial inclusion, and thirdly, it offers an alternative payment means to give a kind of resilience by having more than one choice. But I think, Clément, as you were saying, it's certainly not designed to replace any existing payment means. And I also think you mentioned use cases. It's important because ultimately adoption will only happen if it fulfills some end user needs in certain cases. So I think that's a really good point. Maybe we switch to the other side. We talked about consumers there, but Clément, maybe you can say a few words about what this is going to be meaning for merchants. What change will it bring for them, and also what will they have to do to be ready for it?
So I think Thibault said some of them already, and we mentioned this legal tender topic. Again, not approved yet, but it's highly probable, let's say this way. So of course it's a massive change, because it means that tomorrow every merchant, under some exception potentially, but every merchant would need to accept it. So of course, it's a massive also help to get the adoption of the payment means. So for the merchant, of course, it is a change because they need to adapt their system. So merchant, of course, the processor that are behind need to adapt their engine. So that's going to be some impact on their side. The second topic that is also very important to mention is on the cost. I would say around the cost, because it is a topic. We cannot avoid this one. That is being debated all along. It's how much it's going to cost. And for merchants, the perspective they see out of it is indeed it would be potentially for them a cheaper payment need. So of course they see some interest, very nice interest to get this available for them. Of course, we will see what it's going to be, of course, for every player on the market. But for them, they see that as quite something interesting. And especially because it is responding to any potential use case, any channel, of course, as a merchant, it's great. If I can offer the best payment mean that is available through every channel, whatever the payment, let's say, device that is being used, I mean, that's great for the merchant.
And maybe just a little follow-up question. So we've talked about the fact there's potentially going to be mandatory acceptance and merchants will have to accept. But is it also the case that all citizens will have access to a digital euro wallet? So will all citizens in the EU be able to pay with a digital euro, looking at the other side of the equation?
Well, it's not precisely about being a citizen. In fact, you need to be a resident of the Eurozone to be able to get access to a digital euro. And that will, in the end, by the way, be distributed by the banks that are being called the PSP there.
And also one just sort of comment from my side. because I think we've mentioned legal tender status a few times. And of course, in some countries, certainly in France, I know that legal tender status also implies mandatory acceptance by merchants. But in the UK, it's slightly different in that we have, cash is legal tender, but it doesn't mean that a merchant has to accept it. Now, I have to say, for up until probably 5 years ago, cash was essentially accepted everywhere. So this was whether merchants had to accept it or not was irrelevant because all merchants did. I would say more recently, I've come across more and more merchants where they don't provide cash as an option to pay. I guess it's a reminder that, of course, I think, if I remember well, the EU is moving towards mandatory acceptance for cash across the whole of the EU.
Yeah.
And the current plans are that the same would apply to the digital euro to make it equivalent to cash in that regard.
Yeah, it's both of them at the same time, indeed. Yeah.
And Clément, you mentioned earlier about commercial banks, and I think somehow this feels potentially quite disruptive for commercial banks because to date, yes, cash has been central bank money issued directly to consumers, but all electronic money has always, from a consumer point of view, come from commercial banks. So Thibaut, what are the impacts going to be for commercial banks and what are they going to have to do to be ready for this and what will change for them?
Actually, quite a lot. You're right, David. Let's face it, it's a big change for the banks, for the commercial bank, for sure. Even though you said it, currently they are already responsible for the distribution, of the cash. So they already have something in the system. And when it comes to digital euro, they will have to adapt. That's for sure. Meaning in their core systems, they will need to make some change, some development to integrate this new mean of payment, the digital euro. But one thing also important, it's not only about distribution, but they will really have an active role in the digital euro. They would be responsible for the distribution, we said it, but also for everything related to the onboarding, to the offboarding, to the KYC when you need to register, for instance. So really the commercial bank, they will be not left apart by the system, but they will be really included in the system. That's what we call, if we're going a bit more technical, in a two-tier system, meaning the European Central Bank is responsible for the issuing of the digital euro. But then when it comes to the distribution, it is the role of the commercial bank and more globally the PSP to ensure the distribution, to allow the end user to onboard, to create an account, then to fund their wallet, etc. So they will have an active role, but that for sure, and we have to say it, there will be an impact for the bank because they will need to integrate it into their current system, because most likely they will need to integrate the digital euro account into their mobile application, for instance. So there would be a lot of things to be done on that part, but this is also an opportunity, I believe, to develop some new use cases, to maybe get some new clients also.
So in your answer, Thibaut, what I pick up is that no one's going to be creating an account with the ECB. What's going to happen is the way people will get access to a digital euro and practically use it will typically be via either a bank or another third-party provider?
Not completely. If launched, there would be a digital euro app. But that does not mean that you will be connected directly to the ECB. The digital euro app would just be a mobile application, so a front interface that you can use. But behind that, you will still onboard with a PSP. And you said in a commercial bank, but also PSPs. That's why we are talking about intermediaries, because not only limited to commercial bank, we mentioned the unbanked people, for instance, but you could also onboard with some PSP. So not only limited to commercial bank, but yes, David, we will have a mobile application by the European Central Bank, but still connected to an account with an existing PSP.
So that's a really useful clarification. So there will be a digital euro app essentially, but behind the scenes, it will be as you say, using the correct terminology, an intermediary, could be a commercial bank, could be a PSP, that will actually facilitate the usage of the digital euro for the end consumer. And I guess it does make me think, of course, that one concern that consumers might have about this is it's a central bank digital currency. That means that all the transactions with it are going through the central bank. What does that mean for privacy? I mean, should I be worried that there'll be some kind of government or state analysis or intervention in my spending habits?
No, not at all. Don't worry for it. For a lot of different reasons. First, the ECB has been very, very clear on that. Everyone knows the privacy is the most important design feature in the digital euro. This is the main concern of the consumer, and this is legitimate to have this concern. But the ECB has been very clear on that. They have no interest in people's personal payment data. And secondly, they will not be able to identify the people based on that transaction. And that's where I come back to what I said earlier, which is a bit more technical about this two-tier system. So the separation between really the central bank and the PSP. On the central bank, there would be like an identifier, what we call the digital euro account number. And that's all. We don't know that it's David Daly behind this digital euro account number on the central bank side. But on the distribution side, and that's why we have this two-tier system, you would have the minimum information. But on the central bank, they don't have information. So it is a bit just like today, when you are in a commercial bank, you want to get a card, you provide a KYC, etc., so they know you. That would be exactly the same. But looking at the central bank perspective, they have no clue on who you are. So no reason to be worried on that. And even though you would say, yes, but when I'm paying with cash, I don't even have like an account with a commercial bank. And that's right. But that's why the ECB is also looking, and all the question has not been answered yet, but it's also looking at something called selective privacy. Not saying it would be implemented, I'm just saying it is being explored currently. It means to have different level of privacy regarding the value of payments. So it would mean, for instance, for some very low value of payments, that you would have even more and higher privacy. And we could also think about the offline, where the offline functionality that the ECB has been cleared, it will be here in a digital euro. And with the offline, you are completely private because you don't connect to an online ledger. So you see there is different options. The question is legitimate, but in the case of the ECB, I think it's being taken care of very, very carefully. We have a different option, and in any case, you will not be identified directly at the central bank level.
And Thibault, it reminds me, we've discussed, I think, a little bit this on the podcast before, but maybe just worth clarifying the difference between privacy and anonymity, because I think sometimes these two terms are confused a little bit by people.
The question behind is, would you be anonymous? I don't think so. Privacy is to ensure how your data is being stored and how we are using your data. And the digital euro, just like any mean of payment, would respect all the legislation. So meaning the AML, anti-money laundering, etc. There is no anonymity, of course, because you can't have it, just like when you are paying with your credit card, actually. But there is privacy because your data won't be used for some commercial purpose or to sell you, to send some special advertisement for you, David. So no reason that.
Maybe if you want, David, I can add something on what Thibault said also to highlight even more. And I think it was said by the ECB, by the way. Their goal with the digital euro is to provide a rail, a pan-European rail, where you will be able to leverage on top of that. So again, going the direction of anonymity, privacy, and all those topics, their goal is not to be a commercial payment mean at all. It's really right. So I just want to say it again, because also that's what ECB is trying to demonstrate to the market.
I guess you're right. Their driver is not to monetize people's data. That's not the target that they have here. Maybe just a final question then, because we've talked a lot here about what it will mean for consumers, for banks, for merchants, but also, and we've discussed it before on the podcast, launching a new payment means is no easy feat. And yes, there are technical challenges, but also you have to get people to adopt it and to use it at some level. So maybe, Clément, you could just finish up with your sort of thoughts on what are some of the critical factors for making the digital euro a success.
Yeah, sure, of course. So maybe we can take a parallel with something that happened already in the past and that we all know about. It's around PSD2 that a few years ago happened. The goal was really quite nice. In the end, to open up, to provide innovation, to go beyond. and especially for the consumer, to provide new services with much more protection and so on and so forth. But one thing that we've seen, and we all recognize that today, is that there is no real business model. Well, in fact, there is no business model there. I mean that not every stakeholders is really getting something out of it. And that's the key issue. And I think one of the things that should be tackled in the digital euro is that you have a fair economic incentive and business model throughout all the stakeholders. We spoke about the merchant. We have, of course, the consumer in a way. We have, of course, the commercial bank and the PSP, but you also have the processor. So all of those stakeholders, they need to find something out of there to ensure it's going to be a success.
And that does remind me, we had an episode with Angelo Cacci where we were talking about card payments and what was the future of card payments in the EU. And he did say that one of the outstanding features of card payments was that it created a fair business models for all the participants. And that's often strangely easy to forget when people are trying to launch or create new payment means. This is actually a very, along with many other things, being user-friendly, having a good end-user experience, having protection for consumers and clear rules. But this business model part is clearly very, very important. So I think it's been fascinating, actually, to get your insights on the digital euro, understand what's happened so far, where we're going, what it's going to mean for people. I think also what's fascinating is that not everything is set in stone yet. There is still a kind of quite a large landing zone for where we may end up. And of course, lots of things still being discussed, debated and decided. So thank you so much for sharing these insights with us during this session. Clément, thank you for being here with us.
Pleasure. Thank you, David. And thank you, Thibaut, of course.
Yeah, absolutely. And yes, Thibaut, thank you so much for joining us too.
Yeah, thank you very much, David. I think it was a great insight today.
Really, really good to share on this topic with you both. So, and that just leaves me finally, of course, to thank our dear listeners for joining us once again today as we navigated digital payments.
Thank you for listening to the Navigating Digital Payments podcast, brought to you by Worldline. Join us next time to learn more about the latest innovations, trends, and predictions for the future of payments.